So I think this opportunity that we're faced with in the journey of aloha is to understand that those lessons will help structure our journey so that we are successful.
Our entire One World Ohana connected heart to heart through pure aloha.
Aloha mai.
Hearing more about what everyone has to offer and learning from each other.
Aloha ku aloha mai, the two faces of aloha. To give and to receive. It goes out and it comes back.
If you are interested in learning more about aloha, learning more about how you can connect with other people, I think this would be a good opportunity because different people of different ages come with thoughts that promote what you are doing. So I think you should join us because it'll be an experience that you'll never forget.
Aloha is about leaving people full. It's about leaving a place better than when we found it.
Knowing how to be in community, how to feed people, how to come together.
We're going through the greatest transformation since Copernicus discovered that the sun does not revolve around the earth. We know from physics that we are all connected energetically. That's who we are. We're connected just like all our atoms and molecules and all the energy are connected.
Ones in the world, and a big part of my work is to show that even though people have Western science PhDs around the world, they're operating on very different fundamental stories that should be dignified with the title of a different science so that we could have a consortium of sciences in the world to speak to each other as equals without doing what's usually meant by the paradigm shift, which means replacing our assumptions, replacing their assumptions with ours, putting our assumptions in the same spot at the foundation of science as Western science's assumptions, okay? But I don't want to do that because I'll tell you later about my version of evolution has to do with moving away from competition into cooperation. So I don't want to do conquest. I want to do cooperation between different sciences. I mean, we love their iPhones and spaceships and microscopes and cars and airplanes and all those things, but we need a science of a living world that can say to them, bring us your technology, but make sure it's recyclable. Don't put toxins in it. No toxins? Recyclable? Okay, do technology. Make floating houses, anything. Tell young people, they don't all want to grow organic veggies. You can be a techie, but you have to do it in a way that honors life, right? And don't mess in our food supply with your Monsanto chemicals. You know, no, we don't want to do that anymore, okay? So anyway, it's all about stories again. And the last thing a Western scientist wants to hear is that he's operating on a story, right? Because stories got this name of, we decide there's fiction and there's nonfiction. There's fact and there's fiction. Well, Apila and I have kind of come to the conclusion that there may not be any facts, that it's probably all stories, right?
Yeah. A little more about whatever. Yeah, so you know, in my indigenous belief, I've noticed that a lot of times the ancestors set me up for things, and I never see it coming. You know, I was in Canada, and I had a dream before I came here, and in my dream, these little people with heads like rocks came to me, and they gave me two things, which I'm not going to share. They gave me two things in the dream, and then they showed me themselves standing in a circle with a young woman that I knew, a young indigenous woman, and she was weeping. And then by their concentration, they started her moving and dancing again. And when I got to Hawaii, and when I came to Maui and found myself living on the periphery of this pond and in a traditional house dedicated to the Kiha Wahine, I struggled. I wanted to find my footing and, well, what should I do with this vision? What does it mean? And how can I do this work of bringing the two ways of knowing and being together? And I swear to God, I didn't see it coming. But when I look back about 10 years later, I realized that I had created an academic program, a master's and a PhD in Indigenous mind is what it's called, and that what had given me the power to do it and what had given me the know-how was the spirit of that mo'o, of that lizard here called the Kiha Wahine. And I would join my husband in being caretakers of that site because he had been doing it both knowingly and unknowingly all of his life. I joined him in that, and then these things started happening. But I didn't see until like 10 or 11 years later the connection between the two. And it's a good thing because it might have really been overwhelming for me. And I want to speak something about what Elizabeth is talking about with this change in our minds, and the change in the earth is going through changes according to Indigenous belief and the reality we all can see through science as well. The earth is going through big changes, and also our minds are going through big changes right now. But there's another teaching about the mo'o, and the teaching is that when the mo'o comes, it's a time of great fear. And why that's true is because it's a time when we're facing ourselves. I thought, as a matter of my practice of being a person of two genealogies, I've done Indigenous ceremonies, healing ceremonies, and therapy, psychotherapy for years. I try to keep myself as truthful as I can and to face my demons and whatever they are when they show up. So I was quite surprised recently when I got a really big clobber again. And I'm mentioning this because the shift in consciousness is something I think we need to be committed to and we need to be loving about. And why I say that is I said that when I met my husband that he's a carver, a Hawaiian carver. And along with the dream of the little people coming to me when I was in Canada, another dream would come repeatedly. I would see a Hawaiian canoe and I would see the legs of a man, and that's all I would see over and over and over again. And then my youngest daughter China had the same dream herself. And when I met Keola, there was a picture hanging in his workshop, and a picture was of him as a young man standing on the mo'oleli, and they were sailing. I said, my God, that's it. That's the picture I saw. So I began to learn things about canoes because he was restoring the mo'oleli and building new canoes. And I was helping him carrying glue and boards and whatever else needed to be done. And it was then I found out that here in Hawaii, that the canoe was furthering and complementary to what I had seen about the mo'o. And it turns out that the keel, the bottom of the twin hulls, is called the kua mo'o, right? It's like our genealogy, our ancestry was and does carry the voyagers, the people. It delivers us to a new time. And the constellation of the Southern Cross, time comes in, and that is the canoe. It brings in the new time. So I found out that from this petroglyph that I saw in Alaska, which was teaching navigation 15 and 20,000 years ago, and wayfinding to land people who live on the land, that this was also teaching me that, although I didn't realize it. Then I ended up in Navajo land, and like the white shell changing woman, I also went on a voyage of aloha. I came to the island of Maui. Of course, I didn't sail, I flew, but I was following her story, opened the way, all the way for me. And then I got here and found out that my American Indian story fit with the Hawaiian story, and I was brought to the exact place where the stories come together. And at that exact place, guess who's waiting? The mo'o is waiting for me. So the thing about the change of consciousness. Recently, I went through an experience where I got into a disagreement with two people that I worked with culturally and in a Western way, and also spiritually, and loved these people. And we got into a difference, just small difference that escalated just dramatically. And it happened that it was during my mother passed away a few months ago, and I was in deep grief when this happened. So my emotions were surfaced. I was already porous, and then this thing happened in the work. And what it mirrored to me was the relationship in my family of origin. It brought to mind specifically the dynamic of the rational white colonist, the innocent, pure white woman, and the raging brown woman, raging because of the violence that's been perpetrated and then denied, right? So that was, although these were just two people doing something in work with me, because of where I was at psychologically, that's how it impacted me. And it did two things. First, it just threw me into terror, because what it brought me face to face with was the Western European invasion of American Indians, and the pain and the trauma of what happened to that intergenerationally, and the denial of the reality of that, and then the way that my family took that on, internalized it, and then we did it to each other, generation after generation. And I grew up with that violence and the pain and everything of that dissociation from ourselves. So my friends unknowingly delivered this moment to me. And my first reaction, as I said, was absolute terror and then rage, right? So what I've been working very hard at is looking at this, and I have the help of both Western and Indigenous healer, as well as a therapist, in creating that little space so I have a choice. When that constellation appears again, or that geometry, I have a choice about whether to go into terror and rage or not, right? Now, why am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because if you look at this image of the mo'o here, and you see the reversal of the head and the heart, the emotions and the consciousness, they mirror each other, and they're opposite, and they're reversed. And this is the process of transformation. But it's more than that. The Hawaiian canoe, in addition to the kuamo'o being the keel, the top of the double hull canoe is the pola, which is, it's both light and dark, and it's referring to the planet Venus. And if you know the cycle of Venus, it's very complex. It's a morning star that disappears, then it's the evening star. And if you traced its movements through the constellations from one point till it returns, it would make a 5-pointed star. This is actually the basis of European tribal spirituality, much of it. And what it's about is love. And love puts us through all of these different encounters with reality. So coming to the new consciousness, merging the Western thought and the Indigenous thought, or the sciences, it's all in the Hawaiian canoe. It's all in the story of the mo'o. And this is how this love and this integration is part of the mana of Hina.
You know, it's not only the indigenous people who suffered the violence and then carry the rage and things like that. I find that among my own people, the rage is very deep right now. And it's associated with this whole 99.1% thing and stuff. There are two movies that have come out in the past couple of years, both of which I have a bit part in, and one of them called Thrive, a title I gave them, which turned out to be a very different movie from the one I was filmed for, is really about the rage at the 1%, the evil people who are doing us all in. And the other one is called I Am by Tom Shadyac. How many people have seen I Am? A number of hands. And it's a very positive movie about our oneness and how love is the answer and stuff like that. So we're all going through this voyage with a great deal of emotion of various kinds. And I'd like you all well, let me tell you what the Polynesian sailors told me about navigation. We had this long conversation, Apila was there, and they went through all the ways they had of navigating the Pacific Ocean, which is much more difficult than the Atlantic, without compasses. Yeah, long before compass hit the Pacific, they had not only the stars and the clouds, but the fish patterns and the seaweed patterns and the wave patterns and the clouds over the islands and so many ways of navigating. And then they would say, when all else fails, stand tall in your canoe until you can see the land. And what they meant by that was, take your consciousness away from your skull and move up there. But this was almost like cheating. You had to use all the scientific ways that I just mentioned of steering, and then as a last resort, you were allowed to do that. Now, you have all done that. You've all been in the dentist chair or during a dull lecture or something having sex on the beach in Hawaii or somewhere, you know, all right? You know how to move your consciousness, right? This whole conference is the opportunity for you to work on your stories, to weed your garden of beliefs, to plant new flowers or other medicinal plants, healing plants, whatever you need in your gardens. So, how's everybody feeling? Pretty good? Pretty good? Can we go a little more before we have a coffee break? Okay. All right. I wanted to mention to you this book. Some of you know about it. It's called The Whole Elephant Revealed by Marja, M-A-R-J-A, de Vries, V-R-I-E-S. The whole elephant revealed refers to the Sufi story of the blind men around the elephant, where each of them has a different perception of the whole. And that's what we're trying to get. Western science was a step in the direction, but it can't be the whole elephant. It can't possibly be the whole elephant. So we're trying to see, what does a universe look like to other peoples? We're a multicultural planet. We're globalizing. We're not homogenizing. You know, monoculture is something that people thought up. It doesn't exist in nature. And it doesn't work very well. We see that from what Monsanto is doing to us. You know, that monoculture just is it's unnatural. And we'll get over it, you know, we'll get over it. So we're weaving stories together. We right here in this room are weaving the future for ourselves and many other people. And everything we do affects the whole because we're so interconnected. So our own evolution here in the room is an important part of evolution. And I want to talk a little bit about my way of looking at evolution, but do you want to talk about the European thing first?
This is, I want to get into the European indigenous mind a bit. I was in West Africa with one of my beloved mentors, the late Hale Makua from Big Island. And Mr. Makua and I were at a gathering of voodoo and healers, almost 10,000 of them, just boiling hot that day. And as the groups of practitioners, the voodoo and healers and the tradition almost died out because of slavery and colonialism. And a friend of Mr. Makua's and myself, Dr. Eric Badozo, who's an MD and a traditional healer, took it upon himself to help bring the traditional healing back because there's not enough Western medicine in West Africa, and besides which most people prefer their traditional healing if they can get it. So his work was so successful, his model of bringing these two systems of healthcare together was so good that within about 20 years' time, it had gone from about 400 really authentic healers to thousands that were on the beach that day. And they came by in drum groups as Mr. McCoy and I were sitting under an awning, kind of like a grandstand, and they were coming by the grandstand in groups, and there was one group that came by that was just strikingly different from anything that any of the rest of them. And when I asked Mr. McCoy, I said, "Who are those people?" And he looked, he said, "Deneb guys." And if you know Deneb, that's a star in the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. And he said, yes, he said, the swan, he said, he said, the European people, just out of the blue, he said this to me. He said, the European people carry the power of all movement in the universe. They carry the power of fire, of a sacred fire. He said, but they've forgotten it. And the only thing that's left of this knowledge is the Mother Goose stories. And he said, but it refers to that sacred swan. And then he told me a story about something that had happened to him at Hononau and at the temple there, and how he had gone into it and envisioned seeing these sacred eggs, and he talked about them at some length. So the way he talked about it made me think, well, it's possible for European people then maybe to recover this indigenous mind. It was an inspiration that came to me on the beach that day. Later, we went to visit Guri Island. We went out on this beat-up old boat, and we got to this island. I didn't know what we were going to see, and it turned out that it was a place where indigenous people of West Africa were rounded up and held there, and they were going to be shipped out as slaves to America and to the colonies, right? And oh my God, it was just like there's a tree there that the slaves, the people who are going to become slaves, they insisted with their loss of lives that this tree be planted, and there was a ceremony to walk around the trees so that they could leave their soul there when they came to the Americas, and that they could come back sometime. So I get into this building, and it looked like an old fortress, and I was becoming really sick, and in fact I had come through a bout of cancer and had side effects of radiation, so I was really ill myself. And I got into this building, and I started feeling worse and worse and worse. And then we went into one room where the women were put for breeding, and the children were put here, and then there's a pit where men were thrown into, like solitary if they tried to resist. And then there's a window. It was called the Door of No Return. It was such a horrific thing that happened that some people would jump from that window into shark-infested waters rather than get on the boat. And it was then I learned that the upstairs was run by the upstairs, to all this human misery, was where the bureaucrats and the administrators lived, and they were French. And I told you I'm almost half French. When I heard that, I wanted to vomit. I was so sick, right? I couldn't get out. I couldn't find my way out of there fast enough. And as I was leaving to go, one of the main medicine people, a very old man, he looked at me and he said through the interpreter, "Hello, my sister." Oh my God, buckets of tears. So I ran out to the ocean, and I stood in the ocean, and I was just breathing and trying to come back into myself. Then it was at that point I looked at my work and I said, I'm continuing this academic work of indigenous mind because I want to remember and atone for what my French people, ancestors have done in this world. And as an indigenous woman, I know a way back. I know a way back. And that moho has given me that way back. And in front of this massive number of voodoo and healers going by, Dr. Bedozo said to the people there, he acknowledged me and Mr. Makua, and then he said, Apila is running the world's only program where our traditional knowledge is taught. So what I found out from that time is that I was going to get my French indigenous mind back. And by God, I have. The way just opened up for me. And the way took me every single year, this university I work for, Wisdom University, does a workshop in France, and every year I've been asked to go there to do traditional spiritual things and open the session, because it was a pagan site before it was a Catholic site. When I was there, I met other people, and now every year I go to the caves of France, the painted caves of the south of France. I've met a traditional community that still speaks its language, its original language, one of the oldest tribal languages in Europe, and it's a hidden community. And every year I go there, and every year something more wonderful and powerful opens up with my French Indigenous mind, and I see how the two can come together. So I wanted to mention that, because what I learned from Mr. Makua and from the other elders who work with me is that Indigenous way of knowing and being, it's not lost. We're lost, and we can get it back. Thank you.
And that will make us strong on the voyage. Just to continue about this book, what it is this is a woman looking at the laws of nature. And it's a very interesting book for our times, because we all know the law of entropy and all, the ones from Western science. But she, as a woman, said, hey, we've known these things forever. And she went back through every ancient culture to see what did they say were the laws of nature. And it turned out that all of them had the same laws looked at from these different perspectives. And after telling you those, then she shows how they're coming into the modern world in science, how scientists are rediscovering them. So it's a good science book.